So I'm speaking today with Amanda Kramer, who's spent almost 10 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, specializing in trafficking and crimes against children. She also worked on the prosecution of the Anthony Weiner case some years ago. And as we have entered the MeToo movement, we all remember that case. And in some ways, that was sort of the beginning, in a way, of the public becoming aware of some of these issues. And I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit today about what it's like putting together a case against a person in power, a person who's publicly known, versus a case who's not. So you've worked on trafficking cases, and oftentimes those people are not well known to the public, and some of your defendants will be well known to the public. And how do those cases compare?
So I've worked in a variety of cases with individuals who are and are not known to the public. And one common thread is true both in my experience and I think other people in my office, which is that defendants are treated the same. There's a really diligent effort made to not treat people with any more lenience and not treat them any more harshly because of the fact that they are a person of prominence or power. So, everyone should be treated the same, and that's something that we really strive to do in all kinds of cases.
And how do you handle working with victims of these crimes? I know you've done a lot of crimes against children, and in any of these crimes, consent is a big issue. So there's one way of handling consent when you have a minor, there's another way of handling consent when you have an adult. How do you interview those victims? How do you get the information from those clients, and how do you deal with issues of consent?
So we are always mindful of our obligations to get to the truth and to uncover facts, some of which we will have to disclose to the defense, and we want to know all of the facts that are helpful to our case and all of the facts that may be harmful to our case, and make sure that we're engaging in a really comprehensive assessment of what our evidence is and who our witnesses are and what they'll say, so that we're never surprised and so that we can make an informed decision both in charging and in how to handle a case. And so, it's important to really take the time to talk to witnesses and get to know them on their level, accept them for who they are. Under federal law, a minor cannot consent to a variety of conduct, and but they may believe that what they did was voluntary, and they may want to talk about that at length. And we really need to hear them out and take them as we find them, and do our best to check what they're saying. Where we have other evidence, where we have emails or something else, make sure that we are doing a thorough investigation and give them the time that it takes them to open up and talk to us about everything that we need to know.
And I know at Her Justice, we represent a lot of people who are victims of partner violence. And what we sometimes encounter is that the courts may have expectations about how a victim should behave or shouldn't behave. And, as you're saying, you have to meet clients where they are, and everybody experiences trauma differently. So how would you handle that when you're prosecuting a case if you have a victim who perhaps isn't acting the way some people think victims should behave?
The most important thing that we have as prosecutors, in my opinion, is our credibility with the court and with a jury. And that's the most important thing that our witnesses and our victims have. And, our obligation is to seek justice, but we also want the victims who testify in cases to come out of the experience feeling empowered and feeling like they've been heard. And we're not doing that if we essentially tell them that who they are is in some way not okay, or reject it, or that a court or a jury won't understand. And so we really have to take them as we find them, both because that is what we need to do to preserve our credibility and our witnesses' credibility and to be truthful and candid with the court and with the jury, but also because they need to hear that how they are, whatever that is okay. So a lot of times the things that people believe make a witness not as good of a witness or not as sympathetic, bad acts that they've engaged in, or seeming too sexual or too voluntary or whatever it may be are the vulnerabilities that our defendants chose them for and saw and preyed upon. And, so it's important to just embrace those facts and I think stand behind them and put them in the right light. So we may have to do some educating and explain that, a runaway who was willing to live with someone, 3 times her age maybe, wasn't consenting to what happened, right? And was in fact desperate for someone to give her attention, and that adults are tasked with knowing better and with not preying on those vulnerabilities. So I think it's important for a number of reasons, and I hope that the victims we've dealt with have walked away feeling like at least there are some people who have accepted them for who they are.
How do you think, with the MeToo movement that we've had now, you talk about the importance of hearing victims and sort of accepting them for where they are and who they are, and I think that's a big piece of the MeToo movement, listening to stories. We've just recently heard testimony at the sentencing phase of the Nassar case where we heard an enormous amount of victim testimony. How do you think about the MeToo movement? What do you think about this moment where women who've experienced these activities, some criminal, some just awful, are coming forward and telling their stories?
I think it's helpful for the overall awareness of society about what the subjective experience is of someone who is victimized sexually and the steps that they go through that prevent them from often speaking out at the time that something happens, sometimes years later. Talking to victims and having them open up is an incredible privilege that I think we've gotten to experience because of our jobs, but most people haven't. And time and again, I've talked to individuals who say, but how could I have known something was wrong? She didn't tell me. Or I asked and she said things were okay. And there's a real evolution, I think, of people's awareness now happening as a result of this movement, that the trauma that is affected on someone through any kind of sex crime manifests itself in silence often, and that is not a reflection of consent, that is not a reflection or a sign of agreement or enjoyment, but is the way that the trauma sort of plays itself out. And so I think accepting that reality and being aware of that is a huge step forward in terms of, raising the consciousness for all of these issues among society. Not just perpetrators, but I think everybody.
Do you think that the MeToo movement will change what we consider to be normal behavior?
Perhaps. There's a lot of debate about what consent should look like and whether it's realistic to live in a world with these strict rules. I think that it will change. I have hope that it will change the education that men are getting and growing up with about what consent looks like and how largely girls and women, although this applies to boys and men too, express their discomfort, what the silent indicators are of someone's discomfort or lack of consent, and that it is, everyone's responsibility to be sensitive to those signs. I think that this movement will change and is already changing the general awareness of the continued objectification of women, that I think many people have largely thought we were moving past. So I think it's really productive. I have a lot of hope for the changes that it will bring about.
And in terms of the perpetrators who you've prosecuted, what is your observation about how they're able to often continue their behavior for long periods of time without being recognized, without anyone noticing that their behavior is going on? So you've talked about how the victims are often silent for a whole host of reasons, but we all, I think we would see that if something were going on for a long period of time. Do you have any thoughts about why that doesn't get recognized?
I think that in a wide variety of cases, there are defendants who have learned how to compartmentalize their criminal conduct, and they are, by all accounts, wonderful friends, wonderful family members, and people just don't see the side of them. And again and again, I've seen cases where at sentencing there are letters put in about how wonderful somebody was, and they were in that moment, in that experience. And we tend to think of people as good and evil, and one or the other, and that's it. But it's much more complicated than that. And at sentencing, defense counsel will often say, my client is not just the crime that he or she committed. They're this full person, and they've done all of these wonderful things that should be taken into account. And that's true, but we have to really be aware that in case after case after case, some of the people doing the most horrible things were doing it behind closed doors and unbeknownst to those close to them. So, it's amazing how there is this range of conduct that people can engage in, from, the acceptable to the criminal, and those around them don't have a full story. I think that was one thing that was really surprising to people from the Nassar case, is that this was happening sometimes in the room with the parents, when they weren't looking. And it's a tragic fact that people don't want to think, for a lot of reasons, could happen in their lives, but is an important piece of education for everyone when it comes to prevention.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.